Hi, Corinne and Val.
How are you?
Hi.
Good, thanks.
Hi, how are you?
All good. Yes, Corinne, I saw the spike in Coas County reported this morning, 100 cases.
Yeah,
And
it's
last
pretty
April,
prevalent.
May, we were all saying, oh, 0 cases in Coas.
I know, we went a long time, but then it got triggered in the federal prison
Right.
when they dropped the requirement for visitations. And then it just went rampant from there. But Stewartstown has been horrible. They've had so many staff problems because they've had so many cases, and residents, I don't know, they're having a very difficult time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know this is all predicted, but I think, at least for me personally, it was hard to believe that it was really gonna, this big second intense second wave or third wave, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, because we had done so well and everybody was doing what they needed to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Without a mask mandate and everything. And so I thought we were going to stay steady and low too, but didn't happen.
Nobody's safe. And I saw that the city passed its mask ordinance.
Yeah, I think the businesses really wanted some teeth because they were having difficulty enforcing it.
Yeah.
But most, you don't see people without a mask really in too many places. Even in the church.
Mm-hmm.
As it should be.
Well, that's what the good doctor tells us.
That's right.
Get ahead of it.
Yeah.
So Jordan and Carrie, remind me of your schedules. Jordan, thanks. I know you've been busy, totally straight out all day, but you're able to get to this.
Yeah. Tomorrow is the jobs release, so tomorrow will be a little crazy for me. But I should be able to at least pop in and do, tech check intro stuff. I'm not sure how much I will be participating tomorrow.
Well, if we can, and Carrie, I can't remember for you tomorrow afternoon.
I'm gonna get here as soon as I can. I have a meeting right till 2, but I'm gonna try to leave
right.
15 minutes early.
Okay.
From the law enforcement criminal justice meeting, and then I'll come over here.
Yeah, and I'll be today at 4:30 today. I migrate over to an endowment call. So, and I'm honest. I've gotten a few notes from a few folks that say I know Bill Ardinger can't make it this afternoon, and then a couple of other commission members who are not members of the Adequacy Work Group also just let me know that they're not able to make it. Rick Ladd, who often attends, just sent a note. Susan Ward sent a note
today. Yeah. I'll need to leave at 4 today, Bruce. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
And what is scheduled for tomorrow?
So
Depends.
one more. No, we've set it up. We've posted it as a marathon. We're starting at 2. We'll see how long we really need to go. We posted it until 5.
Okay.
And it's posted as a primarily fiscal policy. Is that right, Jordan?
Yeah, I think fiscal policy and adequacy is how it's listed right now.
Yeah.
I think in general, it's just, a time for further discussion, comment on everything, as necessary.
So today and tomorrow, these will be the last work group meetings.
Right.
I should have brought champagne to share, but I guess that wouldn't.
I don't know about that. Does it start at 2 tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah. What did Dave say the length of the personal statements needed to be?
We didn't end up putting any restrictions on that. I think he used terms like concise and brief, and
Except for Ardinger.
Except for Ardinger.
What size font?
Ardinger's brief is like 8 pages.
And when do you need that, Bruce? By when?
We had put a date of getting those to us by Friday the 27th.
Oh,
because with the idea that after Monday's commission meeting, we should be 95% there. We should be all the way there really in terms of substance. So you'll know if you'd like to make any specific comments.
very good. And do we
Yes,
send that to you, Bruce?
that would be good to go. Send it to me. You can send it to me and Dave.
Okay.
We'll make sure that it's included in the appendices of the November 30th version of the report.
Okay.
Let's see.
So Jordan, if you can get on it too and help with the opening, I'll be on right at 2, right a little before. I'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, that's
But
fine.
I'll take minutes and that sort of thing so far.
Jane, howdy. Let's see how we're doing on time. I'm pretty sure Jay is joining us. I know I guess there was a lot of House activity today, caucuses and organizing meetings. There's Mary. Maybe she can give us some insight.
It's over. The House activities are over, but it was about half an hour ago. So people are still, emails are still flying. But I don't know where Jay is.
He's
Well,
coming
Well,
on.
you survived it.
Jay's there. There's Dick.
Yeah.
Yeah, no excuse. Sorry, Mary.
So our new speaker is going to be Rennie, not speaker, minority leader.
Yeah,
It's going to be Rennie Cushion.
Annie Cushing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, congratulations to Rennie then.
And here's Dick. Hi, Dick.
I heard you laughing. I don't know what you were laughing about, though.
Oh, it's out of my tears, but.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, here we are. Life goes on, right, Mary?
It does.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
all have to stick together.
Yeah, there you
We
go.
want school funding.
That's a good idea.
That's
School
it.
funding is a good thing, whatever it looks like.
Yeah, it's been a choppy day. Let's put it
It
there.
has been. And I have mixed feelings about ranked choice voting.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Well, sometime offline as a Mainer, I'll be glad to share my thoughts on that.
We actually had a Mainer emceeing you.
Right,
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
a
Did you
woman who
actually use it?
probably well
Did you
known
need to
in
use it?
yes.
So we got into trouble because there are too many members who had trouble with the voting system, the technology.
Oh, yeah.
And so we seemed like we waited forever for the vote count because there were 8 or 9 or 10 individuals who were just not making it with their efforts to vote.
Well, it was difficult. It was confusing because you had to go twice to a different spot.
Yeah.
And I was trying to help a few people and I ended up going in too soon and getting knocked out. And then I had to get Donnie to help me. So it was a bit of a confusing afternoon, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Top of
really
everything
exhausted.
else. Yeah.
Sounds like you needed Bill Gardner there to help with the election process,
Yeah.
voting process. All right, Jay, it's all yours. I sent around a very skeletal, but that's all it is, agenda earlier, just a little while earlier this afternoon. And then I sent around the revised version of our the adequacy work group report based on really, a lot of very specific input we got at Monday's meeting. And so I think, I'm sure that captures all of the suggestions and input that there was agreement on Monday. Jay, I think that our main goal today, and Jay, just before you got on, I mentioned that this is the last official meeting of just the adequacy work group for the last 10 months of the commission, although we'll be in session tomorrow jointly with the fiscal policy work group. So we should have gotten t-shirts, adequacy distribution work group t-shirts for the occasion.
I still have some SOS t-shirts, solve
Yeah,
our,
That's right.
save our school.
Got it.
That's right.
You
Well,
got it.
So we've got to play this by the book, right? We will do attendance and
This is a posted meeting. We have attendees listening in today, and so it's all yours.
all right. Well, thank you, Bruce. And I'll just go across the screen to recognize the members of this work group first, the other commission members, and then Carsey School people who are on the call shepherding us. So Val Sanchuk
Here at my office in Jaffrey.
and Barbara Tremblay.
Barbara Tremblay here at my home in Keene. My husband's in the other room.
Jane?
Jane Bergeron. I'm home in actually I'm in Waterville Valley with my dog Otis.
Jay Kahn in Keene, at home alone currently, in Keene. And other members of the commission, Dick
Yes, I'm here, and Jeffrey in my office alone.
and Corinne
Corinne Cascade in my home office in Berlin, New Hampshire.
and Mary Heath.
Mary Heath here in Manchester, and my husband is downstairs riding his bike.
Aha. Stationary. Bruce?
Yeah, Bruce Mallory in Kittery Point, Maine. My family is downstairs. I'm in my home office.
Great. Jordan?
Jordan Hensley here in Dover. My fiance is also around.
And Carrie?
Carrie Portree here in Dover. I'm in my apartment alone.
So I know Barbara, you indicated you need to leave by 4.
Yes.
I have not gone over the latest adequacy draft. I see that we have it. I have gone over the accountability draft, which I think I know I solicited people to participate in that because wanted to make sure we had enough voices reflected in that draft. So Bruce, if you don't mind, we'll start there.
You want to start with the accountability draft?
I think so.
Okay, happy to. Let me see if that's, oops. Just take me 1 second. I'm still not.
Because what I'm wondering is if folks think that there are any missing pieces. We can do as we've been doing, catch up with our words in the text. But if we've missed some thoughts, I think that'd be helpful.
Let's see here. Here we go. And let me blow that up a little bit just to make it easier.
If folks are, I know I had a chance to reflect on this overnight, Bruce, and I did have a few thoughts that I'll share, but any hands up yet?
And I'm not sure this, we're moving at the speed of light here, so others may not have had a chance to digest this either. Chris Dwyer had indicated that she will be taking a closer look at this, sending along her thoughts soon. Not today probably, but perhaps by tomorrow.
Good. And 2 things that I noticed. One is I think we could reflect on how beneficial state comparative data has been to the commission to benchmark New Hampshire funding and outcomes.
Corinne's got her.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to complete that thought, when we started with NCSL and Education Commission of the States, I think we could actually reference them because they have they maintain a library of data that I don't know if we've joined them, if we contribute, and I think there's some ongoing. The state should be part of a national network there to share its data and to receive data as well. All right, I saw Corinne's hand, see Barbara's.
I don't have anything very enlightening. I didn't see any particular points that I thought should be clarified. My questions or comments were more on the technical writing. The third paragraph should spell out education cost model and then put
Yep.
ECM in parentheses. And then yesterday at public comment, we did have a question about somebody that said, well, if graduation rates is one of those data points that you're going to count towards student outcomes, what about districts that don't have high schools? But then in rethinking that, it would be about kids. So if there's a community with no high school, the kids from that district, their graduation would be counted, right? I mean, that's how it would be accounted for. And CTE in the second page should be spelled out the first time as well, but I initially thought I'd have questions about the statement on additional district level criteria. I wasn't sure what that meant, but then in reading over it again, I thought that it was a statement that allowed for flexibility to add whatever indicators there are for college and career readiness, which is fairly new on the dockets. So yeah, that's all. I spent more time with the adequacy report than I did with this one, but
Yeah, me too.
So I have a question for Corrine. Just, with the sort of evolution of competency-based accountability and that not really being in the data right now, how do we account for that transition in this? Because we're using yesterday's data and yesterday's method for measuring performance when the state is in a transformation to, something different. And I don't know how that's going to be accounted for. Is there still going to be some data or some number that's going to recognize, whether people are just competent or highly competent or whatever, the various categories of competency are?
yeah, I've been concerned about that, making sure that we do include competencies in terms of some of the learning progressions. But it's kind of fallen off a little bit off the radar. And I don't know that it's clear. Of course, I've been out now since last June. So I don't know how clear it is to district as to how you're going to measure success. Other than maybe because it's performance-based demonstration for mastery. And, it's still being equated somewhat to Carnegie units of credit. So that has not been filtered out as far as I know. But I think we should include competencies in our conversations when we're talking about, and I thought of this in the statement about additional district level criteria. Somehow we need to be able to measure how well students complete those competencies.
Right.
So
Right.
some measure would have to be developed once the whole state or rollover is there. And some districts may have already been there. It did start with standards-based,
Right.
measuring kids against standards, and then it got switched to competencies, which had some similarities, but I always said the regular ed teachers ought to follow and be trained by the CTE teachers because that's how they function on competencies.
Yeah.
And they should be the model.
I agree,
Um,
Corinne, and I'm
yeah.
not sure how many districts have gone to that competency.
It's about
Based
25 or
system.
30 that are
Have they?
PACE districts right now. So
Okay,
Yeah, the PACE districts are,
Right,
are the ones that
exactly.
took charge of that.
Right.
And Dave Ryan just came on. So the question, Dave, is on competencies and measuring those as data points.
yeah, he was raising his hand.
Yeah, it's a lot of work that we've done around competency-based learning here in
Yeah,
Exeter,
It's-
right next door to Sanborn, which really led the
which
way.
was,
read the way, right.
The issue I'm seeing relative to this question, Val, is the standardization of what proficiency means or mastery means across districts. Each district has developed its own level of mastery, and what what will be accepted for performance of mastery. We're working on developing a balanced scorecard, which measures a number of different aspects of our performance. We have student performance that we're measuring, which is their academic performance within schools. We have educator performance we're measuring, and we're also measuring systems performance and how is our system adapting and developing over time from an improvement standpoint based on goals that we've established within the classroom. So in other words, if our kids are succeeding, how is our system impacting that? And then how is our system changing to impact it even more or remain status quo? The problem that we're going to have, however, is applying that across the state. We have no
That's
standard.
the issue.
And when we look at a formula or an ECM that's going to try and steer money or distribute funds, I think it gets really complex, because we also have districts, non-PACE districts, who are performing quite well on a competency-based model. Yet we have scores of districts that aren't even close.
Correct.
So I think your question is an excellent question, given the legislation that was passed in 2005 and how it's evolved through K to 12 competency-based learning now, without any standard measures other than that piece of legislation. I think it's timely, but I think it's a really complex answer.
Are you giving out grades now, Dave, in Exeter?
We still award grades based on mastery. We're not using, we haven't really dug too deeply into what our grade reporting looks like. We haven't shifted. What we are doing is trying to shift culture within instructional practices toward a competency-based model. As time has gone on, we have more and more adopters. And with a large district like ours, it takes a little bit more time. Believe it or not, silver lining, COVID has really helped us advance that because we're using two different LMSs. One is Seesaw, one is Canvas, which requires teachers to measure mastery, not one and dones. And so kids are getting scored on progression. They have the opportunity to resubmit, revise, demonstrate learning in multiple ways. The old pen and paper test is gone, but students are still scored, not on an average, but on a rubric which has different levels of mastery in it.
Yeah, thank you. But there is no common or standard way across the state still, even after these number of years. So that is going to be an issue for us, right? Yeah.
Correct. I mean, the early grades across the SAU, so we have 6 school districts, 7 elementary schools in 6 towns. And the only reason 7 is because I have a K2 and a 3-5 here in Exeter.
Yeah.
We use Alma, which is a different student information software system, which permits more narrative feedback, and there are no grades. And that was K to 2 this past year. We've extended it to grades 3 and 4 for this year. And our teachers have found that the ability to provide those narratives on the I can statements that we've developed, or competency statements at the secondary level, we use I can statements at elementary. They've found that to be much more informative, because it gives parents exactly the feedback they need to know what are their students able to do and not do yet. That our goal is, as this cohort continues to go grade by grade, that this method of reporting goes with them. So we're working on grades 3 and 4 now. Next year, we'll look for grade 5, and then so forth and so on. So by the time these grade 3 students are in grade 6, they have that narrative, that type of grade reporting for competency-based learning going with them ultimately up through the high school.
And you're continuing that not only in the academic areas, but the social and so forth.
That's correct.
Correct. Good. Excellent.
And we're also doing that with our staff now.
Yes,
Our
good.
staff is working on a competency-based model. And this most recent year, we instituted a competency-based leadership map, So we have 3 specific domains that all of our leaders, assistant directors, assistant principals, the administration here at the SAU office, including myself, we follow an appreciative inquiry stance
Perfect.
in doing our evaluation writing through a leadership competency map. And so we're in it hook, line, and sinker. It's just taking us time to work through it. But we don't know of anyone else who's doing this kind of work yet. We'd like to have a partner.
It's a lot of work and a lot of professional development and support needed to continue that model. Excellent work, Dave. That's great.
Well, it's transformative. I mean, you've got, educators who have been used to one way of teaching are now trying to transform to a new way of teaching and everything that goes along with that. So it's, I'm just, curious as to, as we roll into the future here, how those changes will be accounted for so that the model that we were working with here can appropriately, address the things we need to do for each individual student. And if they're all going to be measured in increasingly different ways, there's got to be some way of trying to bring that back to a standard that the funding model can address.
Right. That's why I love the end of the second paragraph here, where we talk about that we need to continue to do monitoring and taking care of, really looking at all of this. I put 4 little stars by that whole end of that second paragraph, because to me, that's vital. The monitoring, assessing, looking at where we are, what we need to do. I was very happy to see all of that in there, well worded too. And I agree with Corinne. I think we need to watch all the abbreviations. We all do it. We use those, but a lot of people don't know what we're talking about. So.
Well, certainly in the final report, where all these pieces are integrated together, we'll make sure that anytime we reference these things, they're spelled out entirely. Later sections of the report might use abbreviations.
Along with competency-based learning, the state issued its work study practices, and then as a district, you were supposed to develop, and we did in the 2 districts I was in, had to develop a way to measure students on the 4 work study practices.
Yes.
And that's another piece of individual data collection that districts are, had undertaken. I don't know, I can't speak for most, but I can tell you that was also work study practices was part of the grade reporting, quarterly report cards for all kids, starting in kindergarten, right up through 12.
Right.
I wanted to this student identifier and what's the, I'm looking it up. Go ahead.
The SACID. I wanted to ask a question about that too. Go ahead, Jay.
You probably got a better question than I do.
Well, this is, I think maybe David might know the answer. I'm not sure, but school districts are required through I4C and with the student identifier to input a variety of information. And my thoughts were that that continues today. And I also understand, and David, I don't know if you can help me with this, that the commissioner has engaged a product called Canvas, I guess it is. And Susan Heward mentioned that at one of our last meetings.
Yes.
And that was going to be available to all school districts, and that would become a kindergarten through grade 16 methodology to collect information utilizing the SACID, I believe. I don't know if I'm accurate, but I'm wondering if this is the intent of the DOE. Is this a way they've come up with to really extend the possibilities of I4C and make it a continuum? And is this a way that we'll be able to measure performance-based activities as well as the competencies? David, do you know the answer to that?
There are a couple of answers to your question, Mary, and there are actually a couple of parts of your question that I want to clarify. Canvas is a learning management system.
Yep.
So it's separate from I4C. I4C is
Oh.
more about student data and statistics.
Yep.
Under your SACID, Canvas is about warehousing and archiving those assessments, and those assessments again can be either projects or group collaborations, video or audio reports, to amass essentially a body of work for each individual student. And then you can make an assessment of that student's mastery. Canvas is a commercial product. SAU 16's been using Canvas for 3 years.
Mhm.
And when we were asked for by the commissioner called and asked me, would we be willing to engage with it for 3 years on the state's dime, we were very comfortable with where we were and what we were already paying in our contract. Because at the end of that 3 years with the DOE, each district is going to be responsible for picking up the tab itself. So for Manchester is in that situation. So the advantage of Canvas is you can use it. So I used it in my doctoral work. I use it to teach. I'm teaching an online course for UNH right now in their doctoral program. It's an excellent tool for secondary and post-secondary. Prior to 9th grade, it's a highly complex tool and not very useful for the kinds of things that our K to 8 students are using to demonstrate mastery. So that's why we use a different learning management system called Seesaw. And we recommended that to the commissioner as well, that Canvas below grade 9 is not recommended. So the question I think you're asking, Mary, and I think Val brought it up too, is this issue of personalization. And how are we taking state dollars if we're moving towards a personalized method of instruction or learning for students, right? We're trying to measure individual growth, which is what a competency-based learning system is supposed to be all about. How do we then allocate the necessary funding for student A who is demonstrating exponential growth beyond what our minimum expectations are, which will be a very different number of dollars for the student who is so far behind in reaching basic or minimum expectations. That's been my question throughout probably the last 3 or 4 weeks, is if we as a governing body are stressing the individualized growth of students, but we're trying to fund it still in a very non-individualized way, there's a disconnect there. And I think that might be something that you're touching on, Mary, with being able to assign funding based on student data that's gathered in a product like Canvas. So I would offer that as my response to that question. It's a little bit more in depth than that, but I want to be mindful of time.
Yeah, David, can I ask you and others who might be familiar with the SACID? There's suggestions at the end of the second paragraph here that about the kinds of data, post-secondary data that might be shared. That data plus the employment data, I think, is already in the statute. That these are the kind of data that the SACID should be producing, but I think it hasn't lived up to its billing yet. Like, do you receive this information, for instance, from UNH about the students that graduate from Exeter?
No, we have to subscribe to a clearinghouse, which is a post-secondary clearinghouse that allows us to trace students who remain enrolled. And so we gather our data utilizing that subscription.
That's the National Student Loan Clearinghouse?
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the SACID is valuable because you're able to track across. Do you gather enough information that you're, if 70% of your graduates are going off to post-secondary education. Are you able to gather on all 70%?
It's valuable to us. We can. It's very valuable to us. It's not as valuable as tracking them on an annual basis in post-secondary experiences to measure the percentage of completers. To be honest with you, from a post-secondary standpoint, we're more interested in those who complete college in 4 or 5 years,
Okay.
as opposed to those who don't. That becomes the difficult part, Jay.
What is you don't have a good, reliable gathering tool for that?
We don't.
All you know is when they are in attendance.
We know when they apply and when they're accepted.
Accepted.
Mhm.
And then ultimately their initial matriculation date. And then beyond that, tracing them becomes more and more difficult each year,
Mhm.
especially if they transfer schools.
But this is where Canvas will help, am I right?
Well, in the state, yes. In the state, yes. And we're talking about just in the state. Students leave the state who don't utilize that LMS, not so helpful.
So would it be helpful if this bulleted, this point number 1 said tracking students through their post-secondary education experience and then application admission?
I think it would. I think it would because it gives us the opportunity to review and connect with those students who are not as successful in college, to understand why and retrace what happened over their secondary years here, and allow us to make those changes that are necessary.
Boy,
Which could
are
have
there
funding.
devices to do that? I mean, is that are we saying something that's needed but is impossible to try to gather?
I don't think anything's impossible, Jay. I
But-
think when it comes to trying to create the best possible experience for kids, anything's possible.
Yeah. So, but it really puts the onus back on each district to have to trace its students, right?
It does. It does. But I think it's incumbent upon every district to understand how well it's doing based on how well students are doing once they leave us. It's one thing to say you're doing great while you're here, but if we're supposed to be preparing you for college, career, and beyond, how are we doing? We really don't know.
Yeah, this
Some-
all folds into the 65 by 25 goals as well.
Some
Exactly
schools,
right, Val. I remember our first commission meeting, I believe it was in January in Concord, and it will stick with me for a long time, where Val was expressing frustration in students who were graduating, coming to him without the skills that are necessary and basic skills that are necessary, whether it be in advanced manufacturing, retail, business. And that's something that we hear, but I don't know if we're doing anything about it. And these data would be very helpful in us being able to do something about it, more so than what we're doing now.
And this, so you're raising a point that's not a New Hampshire unique issue. This is something that we need nationally. We need some resources to gather the information.
I agree. And I'd like New Hampshire to lead the way.
That's
And I know Fred Bramante, who's on this call, would like New Hampshire to lead the way as well.
Yeah.
We've had that conversation.
Yeah, certainly from the perspective of the business community, and I keep harping back on the CTE thing, but we should have a lot more kids in there because they're gaining the types of experience that make them valuable in the workforce, whether it's right out of high school or 2 years or 4 years later. I mean, that is just critical to acquiring the knowledge that makes them useful in the workforce. And I keep hammering on CTE, but it's a big gap when you compare us to other states. So
so anybody else with comments about this draft? Clearly we've got just a little bit of time, but some time for if folks need a little more time to read it over. Mary, is that your hand? Yeah.
Could I ask just one more question when we get down to the categorical aid, if that's okay? and charter schools. I just want to raise that point that maybe there needs to be some consideration to
That's
the
adequacy.
school
Oh,
district,
see, you're back. Yeah.
That's back in adequacy, right?
that school
You're-
districts.
So Mary, hold that thought a second. Yeah, because you're switching a document. So, but on the accountability and data needs, anything else from the group now? Yeah.
Can we just put something in about the importance of the ability to track the competencies? And is that, yeah, because I haven't really read through it yet. Is that incorporated into what we have? Because it's critical that the DOE can track that information somehow, some way, so that we're getting those growth factors on children, as well as free and reduced lunch, the level of special ed disability, all those factors that are so important to us when we're trying to establish a formula for adequacy.
Sure moves us to a different concept of we've got some fairly easy things to find averages on, and anyway, I appreciate everybody's comments about trying to measure individual growth. It actually is what matters most, right? But you can consider how much data there is that went into this study and how much more we'd be gathering and trying to process.
You know, I think it's just our challenge. I mean, we are a funding commission, not a, educational policy commission, but yet the information that we need to refine and define the proper amount of individualized support for each student is very much a function of the measuring of their progress in school. So, it comes back all looped together here. We're not really here to push educational policy, but yet to do the funding properly, there has to be at least some input here as to what's missing on the policy or data collection side that would be useful to improve and refine the funding.
Yeah, here we are 10 months into it, and now we know what we don't know.
Yeah, well,
Right.
takes time to absorb the data.
Anything else then, Jay? You want me to go over to the work group?
Yes, I do. And Bruce, why don't you lead us through that? You've made the edits there.
Yeah. Again, let me blow this up. Yeah, this is not a track change version, but I think it's always hard to kind of read through those. So, for example, number one was in the prior document, but it was kind of buried 3 or 4 steps down, and folks said, move that up. That's probably really a top line finding for us. And so this finding really sets the groundwork, sets the foundation, I think, for the findings that then follow. Because we acknowledge here that that we still are tied, obviously, to the state's minimum standards and other requirements. The opportunity here is one that helps students perform at or above the state average. And the opportunity for an adequate education is responsive to differentiated student needs. So I think it's a statement that captures sort of overall findings. And then the second one essentially points out that the current system doesn't allow us to address the goal of allocating funds in a way that address variations. I think that language is probably somewhat the same as what you saw earlier. Resources available for CTE are inadequate. I think we had talked about, this is a finding, not a recommendation. So this is simply a conclusion that this work group has arrived at, and you wanted to emphasize the importance of preparing students for New Hampshire's workforce. Then there's this finding about building aid, that the backlog is perpetuating the reliance on inadequate, unhealthy facilities, and a finding based on testimony from Rick and others that that will affect student outcomes, which of course is our interest. Is anything that we can tie back to and measure student outcomes then helps us with funding distribution. A finding that special education requirements, mandates are not aligned with the actual amount of dollars available to districts to carry out those mandates. And then a finding that early childhood education is critical to long-term educational and life success, especially for children from low-income families. So again, testimony that we heard, the scientific base, knowledge base that ties that back. And this is not simply a statement that in favor of early childhood education. My take on this is that, again, we're concerned with student outcomes, and we know that positive early education experiences produce better educational outcomes. And so that's obviously the tie to the commission's interests and charge.
What, you want to pause for a second?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just see, are there any finding comments?
Mary's got her hand up.
Wait, thanks.
I can't see all the folks on the screen as I look at this.
Okay, you take.
So Jay and Bruce, on number 5, special education mandates directed, you've read the sentence. So I think that addresses my concerns, but will people understand that those mandates, of which the special ed requirement in our state law to fund local charter schools is included, basically really is included in that statement. Will people know that? Will it come out someplace else? Because I think somehow, some way, like for the city of Manchester, we have to spend $1 million on special ed costs for children in charter schools. So would number 5 cover that?
A couple thoughts on that. Let's look, remember that we have some language specifically about both special education and charter schools down in the bottom half of this document. And remember that these summary statements in this document come out of the longer briefs that several of you wrote on these categorical aid programs. And so my question, Mary, would be if that, if we take apart that issue that you're raising in either the special education brief or in a charter school brief, and I'm not actually sure that we have ended up producing a chartered public school brief, but we do in special education, and in special education address the ways that chartered public schools deliver special ed in partnership, to use that term, with their LEA. So Mary, maybe take a look back at the special ed larger brief which will be included in our final report as an appendix, and see if it satisfies the question that you're raising.
Thank
you. I'll just raise it. It is the cost of funding special education mandates that's insufficiently matched by state funding.
Let me be more explicit there.
It's good enough for now.
Good.
All right, I can't see Jane. There you go. I can now.
So Jay, I just wanted to expand a little bit on Mary's comments. We together, you and I met with a school district and put together a kind of summary. Will that, and Bruce, you were copied on that. Is that considered part of the documentation?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, all the notes and minutes from the meetings that the commission sponsored are on the website, available for reference purposes. We won't be including all of those in the final report because then the final report would be 500 pages instead of 100 pages or whatever it's going to be. But absolutely, that's all available for reference, particularly as specific proposals are made to translate this into bills or policy. There'll always be that record, and we'll be archiving that record for years to come.
I just want to make sure when we say that we didn't receive a report regarding charter schools and special ed, I think we did one. I don't know whether or not it met expectations, but it included quite a bit of the data that Jerry Zellen had given to us around the conflicts with special ed law and charter schools, and specific around funding. So I didn't know if that was of at all value.
Oh, absolutely, it's a value, and I confess that I cannot keep quite track of all of the moving parts of this puzzle. But if it was, I know you did. If you submitted it, then of course it's part of the record. And if it's a brief that was submitted to the work group as part of our task, then it will be in the appendix to the full report as well, not just on the website.
Jane, we had two different documents that you had an interest in. One was that Jerry Zellen's testimony from early September that he provided. I think it was for public comment, a period, as opposed to.
Yes, right.
And then the other was Borge, the Nashua Special Ed.
Yes, Hudson, Rachel Borge, you had asked her for some data.
Yeah, and I thought, as an example of how the state's funding matched up with the district's costs, I thought it was a good example. Hard to generalize from one, but it was those were two different documents, and I just wanted to make sure that when we're leaving this, that we understand what your expectation is of those two.
Certainly, I wasn't sure whether or not we were going to include Jerry's, but you and I were tasked with coming up with a short report, and we included Rachel's data as well as some recommendations underneath that, or just some bullets that we captured based on special ed and charter schools.
Right. And it was my feeling when we finished the work that we had a good comments about special education costs, and that because it hadn't been vetted with charter schools, it felt like it was more directed, it fit better in commenting about special education in school districts than fitting it into the charter school chapter. So that's why we find that the recommendations about charter schools and special education show up more so in the special education recommendations below here than in the charter school recommendation.
Well, and I'm not sure we as a commission could vet anything, because I think we were under the impression that there really was no data available regarding special education costs for charter schools statewide.
I think I believe that.
Which is a problem, because we have seen and heard from our stakeholders that that's a huge cost when it comes to funding and charter schools. And to Mary's point, does that need to
the bottom of this? The bottom of the document is where there's the section on public chartered schools. Do you want to jump there now and see if that addresses the topic, or wait till we get there?
I'll let you steer.
Okay. let's maybe while we're on this, then remember that at the bottom of this document under categorical aid programs, we have language that's here, and don't know that. I mean, there's reference here to special education, and it's hard to, I know, read this on the fly, but
Yeah, charter schools don't have the same legal requirements, have no responsibility for special education.
Right, but the LEA does carry that responsibility.
Hence the recommendation, if you go back up now, Bruce, to the special education section.
yeah, we address it
Third to last
right
bullet.
here. Yeah, here, starting here.
Hi, Jean. I'm doing good. What a
So that, anyway, there's that specific statement. It doesn't, it's a statement. It doesn't say how or how much, but at least we call it out. So that's how that's addressed. And then we can go back up in the top line recommendations.
You got it.
Where did we?
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah. It looks like we didn't carry a specific statement about special education and chartered schools up into the under the recommendations here. We had a finding about that, but we didn't include a specific statement. So Jay, do you think, when we go ahead and put draft some language in here?
Well, because it's a part of categorical aid, that's why it's down below.
Yeah, yeah. Well, although these other recommendations reference CTE.
Okay, yeah, fine, yeah.
So let me just
give it
a note to myself, and I'll play with some language. Oops. In red, or I won't see it when I go back to it. It's good. This is helpful. We're down to this level of refining it, which just feels good. It's,
just to make sure that it's a special ed funding for students. It needs to follow that student and the services that student receives in the school district. Right, Jane?
When you say follows, meaning the existing money really has to stay in the school district to take care of the kids who are there. Because if you're paying for a speech pathologist, that person can't up and go to the charter school because they've got to stay with the kids in the district. So it's additional monies. It's not just taking existing money and following the child. I mean, I think that was the intent, but we've learned now significant lessons that's not at all possible.
And when a school district has numerous charter schools with numerous numbers of children with disabilities, the costs become significant to the LEA. And I'm not saying that I want the charter staff to bear those costs, because I'm not, but there are children that go to a charter school within the context or confines of Manchester, let's say, that come from outside Manchester. And I believe there's a reading special charter school where the same kinds of things happen. So I think those are things that somehow, some way need to be at least looked at and be considered in terms of what the funding for local school districts in relation to charters, how could that work differently or better?
Okay. So those are the recommendations based on the findings. I think there's a good now link between our findings and recommendations. And that's really the text I think that this group has been grappling with in the last meeting or two. The rest of the document we've been over a few times, and I hope people are comfortable with that at this point, the definition of the cost and how the commission defines cost of adequate education based on the opportunity to achieve at the level of average statewide performance. There's really no substantive changes here. I did try, Jay, I continue to try to catch where we've used performance as a synonym with outcomes, and we need to be careful about that and to be consistent with our model. I do, we talk about district level performance, but we always talk about student outcomes and measuring student outcomes as part of the ECM model. And again, this language about the model itself is, we've had our eyes on this a few times, several times. I don't think there are any substantive changes in any of this. And then we cleaned up some language in our last meeting relative to categorical aid, just to be sure we were being precise. Again, I don't think any substantive changes here based on the last time we went through all of this. We added safety, for example, under building aid. We added security under building aid, and we added a reference to universal design learning under building aid, building design. The rest of it is as it was. Special education language here. I don't believe we made any substantive changes here in our last discussion of this. Here we have a specific comment: special education aid should include provisions to reimburse school districts for charter school students with IEPs who require services from the student's home district. I think that language is what needs to also get moved up to the recommendations listed at the top of the and this need to kind of rationalize the rates charged to the LEA by receiving public charter schools. Also, I think captures what that challenge was. The other thing that I'll point out on this document that is we moved up under East. Sorry to make. I know when I flip through this like this, it makes us all dizzy. Let's see. I want to capture the one. Where is? Sorry, further down. Basically, it's up here. Important. It's this language here. It was at the bottom of the document, and we moved this up to be kind of a catch-all phrase about any tinkering with the, if we add weights, differentiated weights to any of the categorical programs, that would affect the ECM model. And so that needs to be carefully thought about, carefully looked at. And I think we acknowledge that if we add any additional weights added for any will distribute those differentiated aid dollars out across more categories, more areas, and that could affect the level of funding for each of the existing areas as well as new areas. So that was a kind of a comment there about, I think that comes partly from the earlier thought that we might, for example, assign a differentiated weight to CTE, and we removed that, recognizing that that would have domino consequences that we simply weren't prepared to address at this point.
I'm glad you highlighted that. It's a lot of words. I mean, when we'll probably look at that and see if there's some, more succinct way of saying the same.
I have no doubt that people can be more succinct than I can be.
Well, I think you're capturing the thought, along the way, and it's, anyway.
Happy to receive edits on that.
I just one comment, Bruce. I'm looking at where the cursor is, that first paragraph, last sentence, which says any such changes will lead to the need to recalculate the ECM and could negatively affect the level, and then the parentheses, as available state dollars are distributed across more categories. I don't think the word state should be there.
Yeah, that's fine, because who knows, depends on where the dollars have come from.
And Bruce, I wanted to come back on the recommendation under special education on the charter schools.
I mean, did you want to go down below, or
I think the word charged, I think it's rationalized rates reimbursed to LEAs receiving, and take out the word by.
Let's see here. So Jay, sorry, I'm down here with you now.
Yeah, I think there's a need to create data collection capacity within DOE to rationalize reimbursement rates to LEAs for receiving public charter school students or something like that. But it's the reimbursement that's not right.
So I think that charged might be okay, because charter schools can have districts sign a contract and have the school districts pay them. They are charging school districts for special education services. They're not getting any reimbursement. It's an actual bill or invoice that they get for the provision of providing special education services. And there's no uniformity in that. And it's can be all over the map.
So the rates that are charged, what does that mean?
So
if, specific services for special education services?
Yes. So if Mary had a charter school and she had a speech language pathologist in her charter school, she could charge the Manchester School District $150 an hour for that speech language pathologist if that was what the therapist wanted. There's no rate setting, there's no consistency. It's left up to the charter school on what they want to charge.
So if we wanted to make that a little more explicit, then it would be rationalizing special education service rates or services rates.
Or how about systematizing?
In private schools, they call it rate setting.
Right.
The Department of Ed sets a rate for private schools and what they can charge to the public schools. And that doesn't exist for charter schools, so that it's all over the map.
And it can be extremely expensive.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess, I that rationalized, that's my word. It was my interpretation of what the issue was, that, as you said, it's all over the place. And there's no evidence-based link between the service that's provided and the amount that's being charged for that. That's what I had heard. So that's why that word showed up. Systematized is fine as well.
Yeah. I'm just trying to specify what the rates are, I guess, is where I was going with it.
There is no rate setting formula.
Yeah.
With private schools. There is a formula that the Department of Ed has developed.
These are special education service rates.
Yes.
Rates for special education services.
They currently exist for private schools, but not charter schools.
So the words there, Bruce, that I'm looking for, I guess, is rationalize rates for special education services.
Is it reimbursement rates or is it just simply rates? What's the
Simply rates.
simply rates? Okay.
Individual charter schools can pretty much charge whatever they, like a Norton Gillingham charter school could charge anything they want to the local school district who's responsible for paying for them.
Yeah, what a disconnect. Huh? Is you
Yeah, we've unturned a few stones here in this work.
all right? But I think that's important. It's important to get this special education territory correctly stated. All right.
Just on that, I wonder if you could change, say, I can't see the language anymore. There it is. To create data collection capacity within DOE to enable the setting of reasonable rates
Plain
for
language. Nothing like plain language. Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what does it mean receiving public charters, 2 LEAs by the word receiving?
Well, the intent there was those that where special education students are placed, who receive special education students from LEAs. So, but maybe the word's not necessary.
Yeah, I don't think you need that.
And I'll again clean up the language here. I'll make sure we're consistent with how we call these.
David, just to catch you up, students have left your building now. You're okay.
No, that doesn't matter. We're still, I was just working through another COVID case.
Sorry, gosh, you're doing the contact tracing, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's just tough where we're at right now.
It's gonna get worse. It's gonna get a lot worse.
Uh,
Sorry to burst people's bubbles.
Yeah, no, I think that's
long time.
we're all heading to the same shore. We're looking through the adequacy and distribution findings, recommendations, and this is all recommendation, and then the definition of the cost of adequate education, and then the categorical aid recommendations. So just inviting that if there are some observations you've had about our conversations on either adequacy aid or categorical aid, just want to hear everybody before we finalize, get this done for Monday.
So I've been listening and weighing in, at least in my mind, some of the that I've seen. So nothing's coming out right now for me to share, but as I dig in more, I can probably reach out in the next day or two.
Okay, thanks.
I definitely followed what Jane was saying and Mary regarding charter schools. One thing that came to mind is that when we're talking about funding between charter schools and the LEA, it's almost like you're taking the money out of one pants pocket and putting it in the other, because we're still funding from the same local source or the same state source. That's always perplexed me. But I'll dig in a little bit more and definitely provide some other details for you.
Jay, I have a question on one of the bullets under special ed. I don't know if that Jane would clarify. I didn't quite understand the statement that has to do with affirming official guidance documents, including data entry manuals, software manuals, updates. I didn't understand why that was there, or if it had a purpose here. Of course, you have to follow special education law, but I didn't know what it had to do as a categorical aid item. Is it to make sure that there's funding for those things?
So in its first state, that recommendation and the recommendation below it were combined. It made it hard to find what the recommendation was underneath it, so the two thoughts got separated.
So as we talked with special ed administrators, and Dick was a part of this conversation, so feel free to jump in. It appeared that guidance documents and manuals and software oftentimes would not align with state law and could, in many cases, prohibit the funding that was due to school districts or special ed. So we will take Nessus, for example, which is the special ed data system that tracks kids. And the guidance that sometimes districts get is based on a software system rather than the law, and may prohibit a district from getting or blocking the funds that they thought they might have been getting.
Okay, thanks. I have just one other question. Is there any reason why the group was not more specific on the first recommendation of phasing in over a multi-year period versus recommending a time frame?
I think it just relates to the will of the legislature to.
I just worry some of that verbiage, that is too broad, is not going to come to fruition.
Yeah.
That's my fear.
Corinne, this is again back to putting together all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. The final report right now has in it, towards the end, a section specifically on implementation and phase-in. That language has not been hashed out yet. Dave, I know Dave has some specific ideas. Dave, Jay, and Mel, I think, all do. I also think that we've had this kind of placeholder language out here for some time, and the election and the makeup of the new legislature, now that we know what that is, may influence how that gets worded. And the ever-changing and developing information about the state's budget in sort of COVID and post-COVID state budget. So I think that there were some unknowns here that kept it at this kind of general level. But I think at Monday's full commission meeting, we'll need to spend some time talking about what do we mean by phase in and over what period of time.
Okay, thanks.
I know Dave's been giving a lot of thought to that one.
I had some questions about the definition. If we can go back to that. So a couple of things here. Is the intent of our commission to have our recommendation on output-based adequacy become statute, or is this just a recommendation that floats in space someplace?
Jay, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to try to change the statute.
Okay, if we're going to change the statute, or at least that's the intent, then aren't we specifically recommending that we abandon the input-based adequacy model to go to an output-based model? Because otherwise you'll have two definitions of adequacy fighting against each other. One group is going to go for input, the other group is going to go to output. So if we're making a recommendation is output, then you need to get rid of input. Otherwise, you're going to have confusion. At least in my mind, you would.
Yeah,
Jay?
it says it does. Yeah, I mean, it does say use a resource-based. Anyway, it uses other words than input, but it leaves you with you got to build it up from what people based on what's being spent, not on.
Right, but there it says recommendations regarding existing standards relative to minimum inputs. And we know that those existing standards are, $3,700. That's how they add up. So if we're saying that the cost of adequacy is the sum of all of the individual costs of every kid, then you're talking about 100% of the costs being the cost of adequacy. And that's nothing close to what the minimum inputs are saying. So you need to get rid of minimum inputs if you're going to be focused on outcome.
And so what do you think should happen in that last sentence there?
Well, it is true that it's not what the class size might be or the number of administrators, but those are all delineated in the input statute that it currently exists. So I think we're saying we need to get rid of that because that is not, a way of defining the outcomes that we know are the better way of measuring the adequacy. So I just don't see how we can say we're not recommending changing any of the existing standards because we are.
I'm going to need to look at the statute. I think it is in the paragraph above there that I can't get to. All right, stop. Thank you. So maybe an affirmative statement here that in order to implement the outcome-based E3 needs to be amended.
Yep.
I think the intent of this next paragraph, at least one of the intents, was that the definition of an adequate education that's in E2 and E2A and B, that's not going to change. All the requirements that it includes technology and CTE and other disciplines, art, music, language, skills.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's what the intent of the paragraph being highlighted now was trying to get to.
If I might, I think.
Right. Yeah, you're right. The enumeration of the skills is not affected by the outcomes-based definition. That's true. We're not changing any requirements for what academically and vocationally is defined as adequacy, but we are making a pretty strong recommendation that the way that the state is supporting that is not the way that we're suggesting it should. I mean, we're making pretty strong statement, get rid of inputs that are defined as these minimums that we know through just the analysis of the data. It's costing 6 times what the state's putting towards it. So if we're saying up top that the cost of adequacy is the resources needed by each student, then the total cost is the sum of all those students, which is 100% of the cost. So you're basically saying the state is responsible for 100%, and then this minimum input would be, it would be contrary to that very premise.
Yeah. So thanks. I think maybe the way to resolve this is a third paragraph, but not with more words necessarily, but maybe taking that part of the third, this highlighted paragraph you have, take the words from nor down to the bottom, combine it with the thoughts that were just talked about with the paragraph above, and make it make a statement out of what it means to move to a performance-based measured on outcomes, not inputs paragraph.
Yeah.
So Jay, I'm going to ask you maybe when you tonight at 11:30 when you normally do your work, I'll play with that and send it back to me.
Yeah.
I think the effort was here to try to make that distinction between the definition of what goes into an adequate education, that is inputs, and the formula for costing an adequate education. That's really what the commission has defined its charge as, the problem to be solved.
Right.
Now,
We haven't changed the standards for what defines an adequate education from a, the performance or academic standpoint, but we are making a pretty strong recommendation of how it's supposed to be funded.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I don't see the conflict, Val.
Well, you have a statute that says we have these minimum inputs of, class size and, cost and everything that add up to what the state is currently providing as its.
No, we're not saying anything about cost.
Right.
The minimum standards don't speak to costs.
Well, okay, but there's things like we're talking about teacher compensation, minimum input such as class size. I mean, is that in the adequacy definitions for the academic outcome? Is teacher compensation listed in that standard?
No.
Teacher compensation is in the financial input part of funding. So, I mean, to me, it seems that we are making recommendations to change those standards. Because you go up above, we're saying the cost of an adequate education is $18,000 per student effectively. And the state right now is saying the cost of adequate education is $3,700 per student. That's a big difference.
Yeah, but you cannot, I think what we've discovered, maybe we all knew it beforehand, but you cannot rationally move from these specifications of minimum standards to 3,000, whatever the number is. They don't equate.
And so
that's the problem. Okay. So we've moved on. We kept going with an input-based recalculation. We chose not to do that. We chose to go for the AIR approach.
Right. But as we discussed last
what
time,
we're spending now, and then using the outcome standard that we chose to allocate that spending and to weight it.
Bruce has asked if I'll try to order this in a manner that captures the conversation, in particular Val's concern. It does emanate from 193 E2B. And in E2B, it says, shall use the definition of an opportunity for an adequate education to determine the resources necessary to provide essential programs. Determination of the specific resource elements essential to providing. And it's that input based. I mean, the essential resource elements. What does that say to you?
Are you talking to me?
Well, that would be, you know, the teachers and the building and the admin and all those sorts of things. Yep.
That's what it says to me. It says an input based model, specific resource elements.
Yeah. I'd say language like that needs to be cleaned up, and that's sort of a consequence of the recommendations that are in this report. If it were to be implemented, there would be statutory change to deal with that. We'd still have the minimum standard.
Yes, that's right. So that's E2B, verse if you're.
Yeah. Always have to get my colons in the right place here.
See a number after a number, it's got a colon.
Yeah, so Jay, again, you'll
I'll take a look.
Clean this up a bit. Good. Yeah, no, Val, I get the point. We have to be absolutely clear here. And I can recall others in the commission, maybe Chris and others, talking about we need to provide some bridge for people to understand that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not rejecting the idea of minimum standards or of resources needed for kids to achieve statewide averages, at least. It's how we arrive at the cost of doing that.
Right.
That we're changing.
Right, and that varies.
Yes, exactly.
With the student.
Exactly. Jay, I'm going to have to. I have a 4:30 Zoom that I need to get to, and so in a couple of minutes, I've lost track of all my screens here because we're looking at this. But Jordan, Carrie and Jordan are still on. They can support this, but I'm going to need to actually close out my screen to get to another meeting in a few minutes. I can be a little bit late for that one, but not too much.
How much more, anybody else finding sections here they want to discuss? There's always room for folks to raise questions between now and Monday.
And there's also a 3-hour session tomorrow, which is joint fiscal policy and adequacy as well.
There is.
Yep.
And that's a 2 o'clock start, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that suggestion from Carrie, it gives us all some homework overnight. And those comments that we received could be considered during that 2 o'clock meeting tomorrow.
And so tomorrow morning, after Jay's had a shot at this, we can send a fresh version of this out to folks.
I'm feeling on the hook. My 6:30 meeting will end about 8:30, and then I can get on it.
Yeah, we'll do that with the fiscal policy draft as well. So I've been working on it all day today while Jordan's been working on other stuff, and he's picking it up tonight. So
you've been working on that in spite of distractions, huh?
No, I had the I had the video on in the corner.
Would it be uncouth of me to share that I love Val's image? Anyone else getting the Marlon Brando aspect out of?
Yeah.
As the sun sets, my room gets darker and darker. So I'm like Oz, I'm just floating in space now.
Those are great.
Right.
That's the apocalypse now. A reference.
Exactly.
There, I was there too.
All great things playing
Sorry.
in my head right now. So.
All right. As Bruce started off this meeting, he said this would be the last meeting of the Adequacy and Distribution Workforce work group. While we can pick up issues tomorrow during a fiscal policy, I wanted to make sure we gave Bruce the shout out that he deserves for just staying with us and leading us through all those meetings we've had. Thanks so much for all your arrangements, and I mean, you've kept us so well informed that I think we are all the better for the work that you and Carsey have poured into this. So thank you very much.
Thanks for saying. Jordan and Carrie have made this.
Absolutely. It's this work group you owned. They've been at your side. They deserve the huge credit for the engagement in tax or fiscal policies work that we've all witnessed them do. All right, enough. I don't want to make you any more late by showering with more praise.
Well, there was a comment last night that the commission should go on for another year. Creed, you remember that, hearing that last time?
On that note, I'm going to end this meeting. For all.
Motion to adjourn. We're adjourned.
See you tomorrow.
Great.
Good.